Greetings, Vancouver. Welcome back to another episode of Vancouver Real. My name is Mike Zaremba, and back with me today is my big brother, Andy.
Hey everyone, it's good to be back. It's been a while since we've all been together.
I know, Andy's doing he's at the helm today, doing the live editing. And as always, we are podcasting here out of Float House at 70 West Cordova Street in downtown Vancouver, BC. Visit floathouse.ca to learn more about floating. And we just launched a brand new video, informational video about floating. It's either going to be called Have You Heard of Floating? Or What is Floating? So if you want to YouTube that, check it out. It's about 6 minutes and it really breaks it all down from the beginner's level. If you're hearing this for the first time, just go YouTube What is Floating or Have You Heard of Floating? And it's on our Float House YouTube page. And we'll also plug Omega Point, which is Omed's YouTube channel, OMEGA Point on YouTube, where he creates a lot of really cool videos with different inspirational speakers, 2 to 3 minutes long. Go check those out on Omega Point. And today we are very fortunate to have Mr. Ryan Hill as our guest on Vancouver Real. Ryan is a permacultural designer, and he is an expert in permaculture. He did his education for this out of the Permaculture Research Institute in Australia, near Byron Bay. And his website is permanentconsulting.com, which may not be live when you hear this, but it's going to be live very soon, so or soon enough anyway. So permanentconsulting.com, and on Facebook as well. Ryan, welcome to Vancouver Real, man. Thanks for coming.
Nice to have you.
Thanks very much for having me, guys. This is a real treat.
Yeah, and we kind of just met a couple weeks ago at Caleb's birthday party, and Shalina's like, you got to get Ryan on the podcast, get him talking about what you're passionate about, what your expertise is, and it's something that we don't really know anything about, so it's
kind of neat how that works, how we get referrals basically for the podcast. It kind of just fuels itself after a while.
Totally.
Like we'll have somebody on and they're like, oh, I got a friend, you got to have him on. And it just turns out that it kind of just fuels itself after a while.
Yeah,
it's kind of neat.
Yeah, and that's, we'll put that out there too. If anyone has an idea for a guest, please shoot us an email anytime, and if it's
or if you're interesting and you want to come on,
let us know.
Send us an email.
We're open to it. So, but yeah, Shalina just said, Ryan's got a lot of really cool things to talk about, very interesting stuff, things that are very in line, kind of what we're, interested in, I guess. Permaculture is, to be honest, I don't know much about it, so I'm ready to learn from you. And
so you're going to have to basically start off with the definition.
Yes.
The breakdown.
This is Permaculture 101.
101, here we go.
Exactly.
So what is permaculture?
So from the simplest form, permaculture is a design science. And that design science is based around 3 ethics. And they are care of the earth, care of people, and return of surplus to the first 2 ethics. So this work comes from a guy named Bill Mollison. He's from Tasmania in Australia.
Cool.
And
Aussies.
Yeah, he was a pretty interesting guy from the get-go, but he was started off as a fisherman, and I won't get into all his details because I talk about him forever. Kind of got a bit of a man crush on the guy.
So when did he kind of start developing permaculture?
The first permaculture book was written in the early 80s. It was called Permaculture 1. It was written by him and a guy named David Holmgren, both Australian guys. And they put together Permaculture 1 and Permaculture 2 as a design science to put forward a responsibility for each person's individual existence. So we have a society right now that is consumer driven to a pretty extreme extent, and even to the extent that mineral extraction is now related to agriculture. And so when we talk about permaculture as a whole, the majority standpoint of it is agriculture. How do we produce our needs while not mining the resource of soil, essentially, so that we can be here forever.
So the history of permaculture, you said, kind of started out of necessity.
Yeah, so Australia is one of the harshest climates that exists in the world. They have the least consistent amount of rainfall. They go through the longest natural periods of drought. Yeah. So when you start to remove natural forest and grassland, the impacts through agriculture become pretty evident very quickly. So they saw this much faster than we have here in North America, and sort of out of necessity said, okay, well, how do we do things like manage our soil, manage our water, and make sure that we don't have to flee our homes at some point in the very near future.
So if you can break it down for us, like what are like the big pillars of permaculture? Like what are the main areas of focus when you speak about that?
Yeah, so when I sort of try to describe this, you're going to hear a lot about, or a lot of the comment, it depends, because there's so many very specific things that happen within land management as a whole. But the main foundation of permaculture really is soil management. And how do we make sure that we maintain a healthy soil? Because we talk about growing plants. In permaculture, we talk about growing soil. And as a byproduct, we get plants. And that if you have a healthy soil medium, you get a healthy plant out of that. So really, that's sort of the foundation. The foundational work is growing your soil and protecting it against the natural forces that.
It's interesting that you're saying growing the soil like it's alive.
It is very alive, yeah. So there,
bacteria, like soil bacteria.
Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, all of these things live in a very harmonic balance with one another.
Wow.
And when they get thrown out of whack, like what happens with chemical agriculture, the current practices of spraying pesticides, herbicides, all of these
fertilizers.
Fertilizers. It really affects the natural stasis of the soil microorganisms quite quickly. Mm-hmm. So you first year, you're seeing quite a large die-off. You see a really big imbalance, and that's where you get issues with the factory farming world, with E. coli being such a huge issue, that the natural process in which we have to deal with something like E. coli, we get a lack or negated effect of having the soil microorganisms present and available to manage that for us.
Right.
So in the soil, there's roughly 50 million genus of bacteria, and 50 million genus of fungi, and then there's a whole other plethora of soil microorganisms that exist, up to earthworms and arthropods, those kind of creatures that are rolling around in there.
Yeah, totally.
So this might be a little bit off topic but I've heard that one of the main reasons we have such a surplus of food on this planet right now is simply because of oil, and we're able to produce a lot more fertilizer to replenish soils and things like that. And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't actually have this surplus of food, which means we wouldn't have this huge population.
Yeah,
does that relate to what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tied into the conversation. I think that's a bit of a sell. So I'll briefly touch on the history of chemical agriculture, where it comes from. These companies that sell these agrochemical products really come out of World War II. Basically what happened was they had this excess amount of chemical fertilizer, chemical, that they had no idea what to do with it. It was just left over. And during the process through World War II, they saw that the amount of nitrogen that they were spraying onto fields had these big green rushes. And now there's obviously a certain amount of nitrogen that's available, but there's also a large die-off process of the bacteria that exist within the soil that was giving these big green flushes. So the green flush relates to amount of nitrogen being the base component of what most plants need to grow and function as a plant.
Right.
So these agrochemical companies really just saw that and ran with it, and basically developed agrochemical agriculture as we see it today. And they're just trying to sell you a chemical. That's basically what it is.
So is that like
when you say sell a chemical, though, does that mean it will actually increase nitrogen in the soil, which will increase yields and crop yields?
Well, so I mean, there's a big, huge argument within the conventional perspective of agriculture currently, and what we have is referred to right now as the alternative, which, I mean, it'll change over time, but the majority of the studies that exist are very one-sided as far as who's doing these studies, where they're coming, where the funding's coming from, these kinds of things. So they like to pat their own back essentially with a lot of this. So there's some studies that are coming out through Dr. Elaine Ingham, and she runs the Soil Food Web out of Corvallis in Oregon. And so she's basically the queen of the soil. She is the soil microorganism guru, if you will.
Yeah.
She knows pretty much more than anybody that really exists in this field. And so they've got some studies coming out regarding yield capacity, ability to increase yield over time. And, we talk about organic food being such a good thing. Well, we go a step beyond that. And with some of this, the study that goes along with that, the ability of organic agriculture or beyond organic agriculture to increase yield over time is substantially greater than anything that chemical agriculture has been able to produce. It's just the amount that we see this study put into, wherever you're getting your information from. The majority of schools that have an agricultural background get a lot of funding from food companies and agrochemical companies. So, there is a biasm that exists within it. And, that's not to say that it's been all bad. There certainly has been some mechanism that has come out of it that has been beneficial. Monoculturalization is definitely demonized within the regenerative land management movement, permaculture, all of these things. But it is a manageable process if you keep the soil microorganisms within your soil, basically. So a healthy soil, it really all comes back to managing a healthy soil medium.
Yeah.
So what kind of role do the microorganisms have in maintaining that healthy soil medium?
Yeah, okay. So the best way I can describe it is we think of plants producing and growing from the sun. And now, while that is very true, what they do actually is they create sugars, starches, and carbohydrates from the photosynthetic effect, and they pump the majority of those sugars into the ground through their root system. And so these are called exudates. We'll just call them sugars for now, just to keep it simple.
Yeah.
So they pump these sugars into the ground, and these sugars then attract the bacteria and fungi that those plants need to thrive and survive quite well.
Wow.
So essentially a plant is eating microorganisms on quite a large scale. So the life cycle of a bacteria or fungi is quite quick. And as the plant needs more and more available food, it'll pump more exudate into the ground.
So basically, it's going to cause those microorganisms to die off, and then that's what the plant's feeding off of?
No, the microorganisms actually are attracted to the sugars that get pumped into the ground.
Right.
And then their life cycle is so short that they live and die very, very quickly.
Right.
The turnover process is that the plants eat their dead bodies or...
Right, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah, sorry.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the plants consume these microorganisms that are attracted to the sugars that are being excreted in the soil.
Exactly. So they're just the most efficient hunters, essentially, that exist. They get it to come to them.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So we can't get into this conversation right now, but we were talking earlier about how, Mike, we were talking about the intelligence of plants, but we're not going to touch on that right now. But about how we were saying that, coffee or whatever, the plants all have an intelligence.
Oh,
and things
right.
like that, and
well, I mean, that is an intelligent process, right? That's
Yeah.
that. But I mean, it really, you don't want to get muddled with what your definition of intelligence is and what does that actually mean. But
it's true.
what were they doing before World War II? Like, how was agriculture in that? Like, was it in your opinion, was it a more sustainable kind of or eco-friendly endeavor at that time?
Yeah, I mean, definitely than what we have now. The invention of the large-scale till, so turning over soil and subsoil, mixing them together.
Right.
Basically what it does is it causes an extreme die-off event of all of the soil microorganisms when you do that. So
why do they do that then?
Well,
was there a reason for doing it?
It's weed management, I guess, would probably be the easiest way to say that. Monoculturalization, like straight lines.
So it helps with planting.
Yeah, so they'll turn over maybe 3 foot wide section of soil to form a bed so that they can plant on a raised bed or in specific rows and lines to keep things straight so that they have the large combine machines that can come by.
Easy for harvesting.
Yeah,
More
so
efficient.
Yeah.
It's definitely that. When it comes to agriculture, sort of, we'll jump back to maybe 100 years ago because some of the advent of current agricultural practices were certainly developed before World War II. It was just on what scale were they used. But it's really it's become a detached thing from the general population. So we look at the amount of people involved in agriculture today. I think we're floating around 2.5–3% of the population's involved to some form of agriculture. Well, 100 years ago, we were over the 50% mark.
Wow,
so
that's crazy.
Yeah, and so this is where the advent of mechanized farm industry sort of came in to really take a lot of
the human labor out of it.
Exactly, right. But with that, we now see that those scales aren't necessarily the most functional things to operate on.
So, and you were touching on the research that's coming out of Oregon right now. And it's showing that it's potentially even more efficient.
Yeah. So with with a plant specifically, we'll go with corn. It's one of the bigger crops that exist in the monoculturalization world. There's a study. I'm pretty sure it came out of Harvard, but they were talking about yield increase. So yield capacity is the ability to get two species or two genus of the same plant, breed them together, get the best quality product, highest production out of it. So we've kind of capped at what current like the current model of agriculture can produce because of the lack of fertility in the soil. So they spray all these chemicals, fertilizers, whatnot. 80% of these fertilizers which they spray leach right back out into the groundwater. So
it's not even effective use of these chemicals.
No, and I mean it's strictly because they make them water soluble, so the plants can uptake them as fast as possible.
Right.
With what they're doing down in this specific study was looking at corn in a regenerative model of agriculture. They were able to put two fields side by side essentially, and take both approaches, the standard approach that we see today, and a healthy soil medium as the standpoint in which to grow healthy food. And I think the production was up 78% on average over the monoculturalization standard process with it. So, and that's just one example. We're talking about 50 million genus of bacteria, 50 million genus of fungi that exist, and that's just a guess. Like we've only really touched the surface on soil science. I think we have like about 5,500–6,000 species of bacteria actually classified genetically. So there's a huge scope in which we can really come to specifically utilize breeding microorganisms and redistributing them to the landscape in a very effective manner. It's just as the ball gets rolling with, what plants, like which specific situations the best, what kind of plants do we grow with them so that we can make sure that they get available nitrogen or phosphorus or any of there's 42 essential minerals that a plant needs, or nutrients that a plant needs at any given time. And chemical agriculture takes the approach of only putting 3 of those out: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So when you see the NPK or those little 3 numbers on your lawn fertilizer bag, that's what it's referencing to.
Yeah, right. So can you walk us through the process, like maybe a very generalized process of how you would replenish soil bacteria and make it usable again? So
we'll go with just the most functional way to redistribute soil microorganisms, and then we can sort of track our way through that because it's quite a process. So compost teas are essentially the best way to go about doing this as of right now. And what a compost tea is it's a very specific type of compost that is put through a thermophilic process. So thermophilic referring to coming up to a certain temperature. And as you put this compost, or the reason it comes to its temperature is because of the microorganism content. They're vibrating, moving around, and there's a nitrogen burn-off within this compost. So this is the ideal circumstances in which the microorganisms thrive.
Is that what causes, like, when I put, my compost gets warm?
Yeah.
That's what that is?
Yeah, so there's the decomposting process is...
produces heat.
Yeah, it does.
That's
it
crazy.
can produce quite a bit of heat.
Oh.
To the point where there's a guy on Vancouver Island who uses fish as one of his main sources of nitrogen.
Okay.
And last year he had all of his compost piles catch on fire in the middle of the summer because there was so much heat coming off of it, and the sawdust layer that he had on top of it was so dry from the sun that they all burst into flames. So there's certainly, some potential for a little bit of disaster.
I guess that would destroy any kind of bacteria that might have been growing.
Yeah. So
you don't want that.
Fire and bacteria don't mix.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's amazing, though. That's impressive.
And neither do the sun and bacteria. So I'll just jump back to this real quick.
Yeah.
So basically what you're doing is you're making a compost. You're taking this compost for its microorganism content, putting that through an aeration cycle. So you put it in water for about 24 hours with a few ingredients that help those microorganisms breed, and you're turning hundreds of thousands into potentially trillions of bacteria, and then you spray them onto the field or the crops specifically that you're trying to reintroduce those microorganisms to. And so it's a really effective, really efficient way to get them back on the landscape in numbers.
Okay.
And then obviously the other process is to make sure that you never see bare soil. So when you see bare soil, if you think of the crust of the earth as like the skin of the earth, the soil would be the blood. So when you see blood coming out of your arm, the first thing you do is you cover it up.
Right.
It's exactly what we should be doing with.
So bare soil, meaning it's exposed to the sun, so the bacteria are not regenerating properly.
Exactly. Yeah. The UV process that happens on the microorganisms is quite impactful, and then they're a lot more exposed to predators and whatnot.
So if you say bare soil, would that mean that you would want crops growing on those soils?
Yeah, you either want crops, or we'll take the example of a deciduous tree. So a deciduous tree drops its leaves every year. And covers that ground layer up. We typically rake them up and get rid of them, but in nature,
natural
process, when you see them in nature, what it's doing is it's cycling nutrients that it's pulled from the ground into its foliage so that it can photosynthesize, then redropping that back down so that it can protect its soil layer to continue to build soil.
Right.
That's that's its home. That's its its food is that soil, so it needs to protect it, and that's its process.
Yeah.
Wow. So did some of this practice kind of come out of observing nature and the natural processes that happen in nature?
Yeah, that's my biggest job when I go out and do a consultation on a site, or if I'm working on any piece of property, really is the first thing we do is observe. And we typically say that you want to observe a piece of land for a year before you even break ground. And that's a long period of time, but in retrospect, it's relatively short. So there's a huge amount of climactic factors that are going to impact what the potential of a site is, what can happen. So we really need to make sure that where is it flooding, where's the prevailing wind coming from, how much rainfall do we get, where do we get frost forming first, where do we have wet spots in the ground, where do we have ample drainage. All of these things relate to how you can produce a site for maximum production.
Right. And what kind of as a permacultural designer, who's hiring you right now? Like who's looking? Like who do you work for? Like and that kind of stuff. Like who's doing this kind of work? Is it for agriculture, or is it for just?
It's creeping into agriculture right now. The majority of the work that exists for me is private landowners who see some of the issues that we have with nutrient density in food, water security, water quality. The correlation between health and food. They really want to have their own space in which they can produce their own food and not do so in an impactful way to the environment. They actually do so in a way that improves the surrounding environment over time.
Cool.
So that's where the vast majority of my work has come from so far. The agricultural application is something that is being developed, rapidly through, there's a huge amount of people that exist in this field now that are doing phenomenal work, starting to get their word out. Mark Shepard is a guy I think he's from Pennsylvania, and he has put together a system that you can on scale farm to feed the masses of people. And have you guys heard of Joel Salatin?
No.
He's based out of the United States as well, and he is he's a bit of a madman, but he's been doing this style of agricultural production for a lot of time, the last 30 to 40 years, I believe. And he really has, a really good model to look at as what we can do as far as agriculture. So, there's a lot of fear that is based around what exists in the agricultural world right now. We see a lot of resistance to change. We're sort of at a point right now where we're going to see 50% of agricultural land in the next 10 years change ownership. So there's a lot of people who have, maybe 40 years of time invested in cultivating their land a very specific way, according to, the book, whoever put it out there. And they, have 5, 10, maybe 15 years left. They don't want to change. And that's it's an imposing thing, because there is a process that it does need to go through in order to make that switch over and to get the results. Like, it does.
I guess if you're just trying to save for retirement and you just want to make some
exactly.
extra money so you can retire comfortably, you're not worried about changing your processes right now.
For sure. The average farmer, I think, is 58 in North America. So,
that's the average.
I think that's the average.
Oh my God.
So there's a huge, it's 58 or 53. Regardless, it's in the 50s. So it's a really high number. And that's where we're going to see the redefinition of what we do to produce food, reconnecting with the land, making sure that we are taking responsibility for our existence on this planet.
So what would you say is the actual end goal of everything that you're trying to do? Is it just would you say the end goal is to increase food quality?
Me specifically, I'll briefly touch on a bit of my backstory. Yeah. I got into a pretty serious snowboarding accident. I was living in Whistler at the time, and was told that I was going to have chronic back pain for the rest of my life.
What did you do?
I fell about 15 feet into a creek and just about basically landed as hard as I could without breaking my back and my pelvis. And really, so it was all lower back pain, and was completely locked up. Felt like the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz.
No, we can sympathize with that for sure.
Yeah, it was a tough period of time. So I went to my doctor, I went to back specialists, physiotherapists, chiropractors, you name it. Basically, everyone said the same thing. Like, you were going to be dealing with this for the rest of your life, and you really need to take a look at how to manage that. So I really don't like people telling me what I can and can't do to a certain degree, and really didn't like the idea of that being my reality. So I started taking a look at natural medicine, healing processes and whatnot, and how to really heal the body. So I got into basically growing some of my own food and looking at some very specific nutrient-dense foods that do exist, because nutrient density is such a huge issue right now with food. And, I mean, it's going to be more prevalent as time goes on. It's something that's quite easy to test for, and we can see that. So, I mean, it really all came back to the quality of food that I was eating. I adjusted my diet completely. Really took a look at the food, why I was eating the foods that I was eating, cut sugar out of my diet for a long time. Not all sugar. I still had maple syrup and honey, some of the natural things that exist that, are quite good for us, really. And I went through like a movement process I got into a little bit of yoga, and it wasn't a ton. It was really more the food that I was eating. This is a sensitive subject, but I was eating a bunch of raw cannabis for a good period of time. The properties that exist.
The leaves themselves?
Yeah, the leaves and the flowers. So the part that people smoke typically. I was consuming that. I consumed it for about 2 to 3 months, and after that, and then the constant readjustment of my diet, my back pain pretty much went away.
What was it about the cannabis consumption do you think that helped?
So the CBD content in cannabis is, definitely not understood to its full extent, but it has a lot of healing properties. It helps to allow the cells in the body to communicate back and forth more effectively, therefore allowing your nervous system to say, okay, well, we've got an issue there, let's focus our attention on that, as well as a whole range of anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and fungal properties that it has in its edible form. And that's where it's a sensitive subject, and there's obviously a lot of push we see worldwide for its legalization.
Yeah,
I'm of the position that it's certainly an edible plant.
So how would you eat it? Like salads, smoothies?
Salads, smoothies. I was smoothies. Yeah, smoothies is my thing.
Did you get the psychoactive effect from the THC at all from that?
No. So it's the THC is an acid before it's heat treated. So that's when you smoke it or when you cook it, it gets put through a process where it heats up, and that acid goes from THCA to THC, and that's where it becomes psychoactive. So you have absolutely no psychoactive component to it when it's in its edible form. Right. It is in your bloodstream.
So were you just getting it through a dispensary? Or?
No, I had a buddy of mine from the Fraser Valley who's a medicinal grower.
Oh, okay.
And
so you use that for the leaves and stuff like that?
Just the offcuttings that he wasn't selling to the dispensary.
Wow. How much of that were you kind of consuming, like a day?
I guess it would be sort of like a handful. If you take a handful of spinach or lettuce or whatever and put it into a blender for a smoothie, sort of somewhere roughly around there.
And how quickly were you seeing like the healing effect?
3 days.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's where it wasn't so much that I noticed it. It was my range of motion, my mobility without pain really improved after about 3 days.
Is that anything because of the anti-inflammatory?
I think that was definitely part of it.
Yeah.
Is having the chronic inflammation in a situation like that really helps to break it down a lot faster.
So cannabis and changing your diet is what you think primarily
eating cannabis.
Eating cannabis is it primarily what healed your back, you think?
Yeah, and certainly with a bit of movement as well, stepping outside of where it was comfortable to exercise certainly helped as well to reactivate muscle strength and the certain other aspects that you can go through with physio.
Yeah.
I mean, you're hearing more and more of the benefits of just eating cannabis as well, like the oils and the CBD stuff, like not the psychoactive components, but like massive medicinal properties that are just kind of being researched now and highlighted. And like you said, there's so much more that needs to be done, right?
Yeah, there's a really interesting effect that happens with cannabis, and I actually think that I'm kind of glad we brought it up. Sort of hesitant to just
no, dude,
we're cannabis friendly.
Okay,
great.
Yeah. Cannabis is a plant which is in a classification called a bioremediator. So what that means is it has the ability to pull toxins out of the ground. The specific toxins that it pulls out of the ground, I'm not 100% sure on, but it will accumulate higher concentrations of these toxins. So if you are ever using cannabis for anything, finding organic or even better than organic, if possible, is certainly the way to go. Yeah.
So it's just getting all those toxins, so it's going to be in the plant.
It's going to concentrate themselves in the plant, mostly in the flower component where it's going to produce the seeds. So,
will you if you were to smoke that, would you inhale those toxins then?
Yeah, essentially you would be. So any of the conventionally grown marijuana that exists, Vancouver's got such an abundance of it.
Yeah.
If you were to go and pick it up off the street, it's very likely that it's not organic, and the chemicals that they're using on it, unfortunately, it's outside of the agricultural limitations that are regulations. So the amount of any given substance that's getting put on it is really relatively unknown. So
if you go with organic cannabis, is it a safer bet then?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, there's not a lot of it out there. Like,
it's very rare. Yeah.
Like Medican, I don't know if they ever have it. The place we go to.
I mean, I ask sometimes, and no, not very often, but once in a while. I think I maybe tried it once, and just because they had it. As soon as I heard it, I'm like, "Ooh, that sounds amazing!" Just because I've never had it before. But do you think? Well, I'm gonna imagine that stuff's only. I mean, I had no idea. I had no idea that's the case of the property of the plant to be this toxic absorbing property.
Yeah, so for cleaning up like waterways, anything like gray water that comes out of your house, hemp's actually a really utilizable plant for that. So they're the same family of plants. So cannabis and hemp there.
So they could use these plants to help clean up like toxified land and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that and micro-remediation, which is, are you guys familiar with Paul Stamets?
No.
He's the mushroom king of the world.
Okay, yes, I've seen his videos before.
Yeah, so he's put forward some pretty compelling evidence to clean up toxic waste sites, pull radiation out of the ground. There's certain species of mushrooms. So oyster mushrooms will pull petroleum out of the ground, concentrated in the mushroom itself and the fruiting body of the mushroom, and actually clean it up relatively fast. to the extent where you have to like really go back over the data and check it more than a couple of times to verify that you didn't do something wrong or put it on the wrong.
Drastic?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's quite quick. So you see like the gas stations, the old gas station sites in
Well, they leave them
Vancouver.
for 10 years, right? They become like a
25.
Is it 25?
Yeah, 25 years they have
It
to
becomes
leave them
basically
for.
a no-go zone.
Can't dig.
Yeah.
So the natural process. So I mean, with the application of remediation techniques that come from nature, I mean, for every
Plant a field of cannabis there.
yeah, exactly,
mushrooms
or
yeah.
soy, or soy is another one.
Wow.
Which is really scary.
And obviously, this type of stuff you wouldn't want to eat it. You want to let it
No,
live
it-
its
yeah,
natural
yeah, I
life
mean,
cycle.
yeah,
and
you concentrate it.
decompose.
Well, things like cannabis, you could turn it into like a building material potentially. So you could actually lock that up into like, they can make like building materials out of like the fibers from cannabis.
Right. I'm sure you can still use the
hempcrete,
fibers,
Cannabis
right.
crete, yeah,
Right.
for
Yeah.
sure, absolutely.
That's cool. It's amazing that we're able. I mean, when I hear stuff like that, I get crazy amounts of optimism. I'm just like, we're using nature to clean up our
Toxic shit.
our toxic crap.
For
you know what I mean?
for every toxin that exists in nature, there is a bacteria or fungi that sees it as food. It's just how much of those concentrations of those particular microorganisms do we put into those situations.
Right.
And so that's why they clean up over time. There is a breakdown process. It is caused by something. So as we put more and more initiative into these types of testing, finding out which species of mushrooms or which species of bacteria
Cool.
are going to clean these things up, we have a lot more potential for it. So
this kind of stuff is just in its relatively infant research space right now.
well,
It's
I
kinda-
wouldn't say that's in its infancy necessarily. I think it's just been very suppressed and sort of ostracized to a certain degree. We're like, that's not possible, and there's been a blind eye turned to the possibilities of it, I guess, because it is time intensive, it is labor intensive, it is financially intensive to figure these things out to a specific science component in which we, as our culture has sort of grown to believe to be a part of, science is going to have all the answers for us. So we need to have the foundational work behind it for the general population to see. We need a 25-year study to say like this is why this works. These are what exist here in this situation. So the funding's coming now.
Right.
There's the money's starting to flow. People are seeing and understanding that we need nature as much as any other animal on this planet. We are so intimately connected with it, and we need to reharmonize relatively
To me,
soon.
it seems like people don't really change until they actually feel the pain of whatever it is that's they're causing necessarily.
Yeah.
So it's like we need to start getting more sick from our foods or something like that until we actually get motivated enough to put money into research like this in order to change the way we produce food.
Yeah,
right? So it's like,
absolutely.
it'd be nice to throw a study and be like, look, it's healthier to do it this way. But until people really start feeling the pain of whatever it is that's causing that, I feel like they just don't change.
Well, I think it's happening now, though. I think people we are sick because of our food. I mean, the general population on a mass, especially like you look at North America at large, it's very much like that. We are getting sick from what we're eating and the refinement process of the foods we're getting and all that.
But
kind of
yes
stuff.
and no. Like there's two sides of that argument too, and the other side would be that people are living longer now than we ever have.
Yeah, but I don't. That's true, but I mean that's just to kind of take into account our biotechnologies and our understanding of illnesses and treating symptoms better versus treating maybe the cause.
I'm not saying we shouldn't be looking at it. I'm just saying that
Yeah, I think that side of the argument can be squashed.
it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just because
there's the component that I see with that is that we have much easier lives, much more protected lives. We're not exposed to the elements of the world that cause huge amounts of stress. Like you got to run from a bear or a tiger. We have relatively sterile home environments where we're not exposed to pathogens and toxins in the same manner in which we were.
I would argue that we're more chronically stressed these days than we were back then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to agree with that,
Yeah.
but to the extent that where that stress comes from changes how it relates to your health.
totally. Yeah. Yeah. No, and the big thing is too. I was trying to think when you were talking. Is it like what's going to cause the change? Is it going to be government's getting involved and changing the subsidies they're giving to different agricultural practices, or is it going to? But what's going to cause that? It's not going to. The change comes from the public. It really does. In terms of
you vote with your dollars.
Exactly.
Every day. Every day
Exactly.
you go and buy food. You have that choice whether you want to spend the extra couple of bucks on an organic food bill or not.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I am definitely for the organic food. I would take that stuff every day of the week over a non-organic product every day, every time that I could,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the change is going to come from eventually, and because you're going to start seeing people see, okay, that's what the demand is. What's
so there'll
the
be
new
a profit
demand?
motive behind it, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there is. I mean, organic food is quadrupled every year. So in the last 8 years, that it's sort of
quadrupled.
Yeah, annually quadrupled. So it's becoming trendy, and whether that's the reason why, or people are starting to wake up to the fact that, hey, this food that I'm eating constantly is making me sick. My personal opinion on the state of our health is the biggest threat right now to humanity is chronic malnutrition. We are eating food that has absolutely, zero nutritional value for the most part. You go and do the nutrient density testing on, conventionally grown peppers, carrots, lettuce, whatever it is. I mean, it's extremely low in nutrients.
So, and just for people that maybe aren't sure, like when you say nutrient density, it means if I have one pepper and another pepper that are the exact same size, they might not have the same nutrient content?
No, completely different. Yeah. So the nutrient availability in a plant really comes from the soil again. It's a vicious loop right back to soil all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So plants need roughly 42 different mineral components to help them grow effectively in a nutrient dense manner. Mm-hmm. And when those microorganisms aren't available to put forward to make those specific nutrients soluble to the plant, then those plants then no longer have those.
So is that why you'll see some I'd see this commonly is when an organic versus a non-organic. The organic has a richer color typically.
Yeah.
And usually not as big.
Yeah.
It's more concentrated almost.
Usually not as big. And so the reason it's not as big coming off the plant is because of the fertilizers that we use are water soluble. So the plant doesn't have the choice to which nutrients and fertilizers it's going to uptake when it's made into a water soluble form. So what happens is the cell walls in the plant stretch. And that's where you'll see if you take an organic pepper and a non-organic pepper and you put them on the counter and you leave them there for 5 days, which one has a better shelf life? The organic one, almost every time. Yeah.
Wow.
So the nutrient density of the plant also, the nutrient density of the fruit or vegetable, whatever you're eating, correlates to longevity, shelf life.
Would you require less water then to produce an organic plant than you would an inorganic one?
Well, so there's, the initial answer is yes, you would. But organic agriculture isn't all it's sort of built up to be. There's a lot of talk, and so don't get me wrong, I will choose an organic apple over a non-organic apple every day of the week if I have that choice.
Yeah.
But if I have the choice between a wild orchard apple versus an organic apple, no matter what the circumstances are, I'm going the other direction. I'm going beyond organic every time. Yeah. So organic agriculture still uses a lot of the same mechanized machinery to turn over the soil. They have organic fertilizers, but they're still very harsh. It's still soluble fertilizers that are uptaken by the plant quite quickly.
Yeah. Just because it's organic doesn't mean they're practicing permaculture.
Yeah, certainly not. And nor does it mean it's not exploitative too. There's a large amount of organic agriculture in this world that is, only exists because of slavery. There's a huge component to that, which is, it's not talked about very much. We have a very specific way of life.
Well, a lot of it was built off of slavery, for sure. It's not existing as much now. We can argue it's not existing as much now, but maybe just in a different form. But like sugar, cotton, definitely.
Yeah,
we're slavery-driven industries, right?
For sure, we are. Yeah, it's been a vicious cycle. So I think that's the advent of the internet is really sort of awakening I don't want to say exclusively our generation, but it's certainly, we're a little bit more familiarized with navigating the internet and getting this information, and being able to take bits and pieces and integrate that into our lives where we can. We still got a lot of space for growth, in all areas. But we're making the changes are happening, and whether it's just getting trendy or whether it's people sort of waking up to the fact that we don't want to buy clothes that are produced in a country where they're
using child labor,
they're using child labor,
borderline slave labor, whatever you want to call it,
and they poison the waterways with the byproducts of those industries. And so all of these things are starting to come into play into quite a large form. So we're seeing the change. When I first found out about permaculture, it was kind of like an escapism for me from like the terrible things I saw in the world. But as I've gone through the transition period of a few years now, I'm really seeing a lot of hope and a lot of positive motivation to move forward with it for the changes that they are essential, but they're just better ways of life. The quality of food is so correlated to the mental state of your own capacity.
I was gonna say consciousness.
Yeah, and vice versa, right? So
Sure.
they compound on themselves quite drastically,
Right.
quite well.
So if money were no object, and you could just go and you could create a sustainable agriculture farm, I don't know if that's not the right term, a permaculture farm,
Yeah.
however you wanted to create it, like what would that look like, and what would the results be from that?
All right, so if I was in the northern hemisphere, I would have a mild slope facing south, so I'm collecting the most sun that I can, and it's going to have a large amount of rainfall.
Yeah.
I mean, and large amount of rainfall is not necessary for a regenerative farm to any degree, but it does alleviate a lot of the stress of how much you have to store, the amount of work that you need to put into that. So. I'd have a large system of dams or like ponds that are interconnected with one another. So as one pond overfills, we're collecting that water to the next one and the next one. So it works its way down the hill. We're holding onto that water as long as possible. I would probably build a bunch of houses out of shipping containers, because that just sort of seems like the most feasible way moving forward for
Affordable housing.
Yeah, affordable. I mean, you can buy a 53-foot shipping container that's 8'10" for about $2,800 right now.
Whoa.
And you can turn those into
It's like 2 months mortgage payments right there. Shipping container.
Yeah.
yeah.
What am I doing?
Yeah, and you can put these things together. You can stack things on top. Those containers are designed to have 12 fully loaded containers stacked on top of them, so the structural integrity is amazing. You can, have your rooftop balcony, garden on your roof, whatever you want. You can weld to the outside to insulate it appropriately. There's a huge amount of techniques that can be put into place there. But so when you talk about like a homestead or a regenerative agriculture farm, whatever you want to call it. We sort of take a look at it within permaculture, and the structure of WAS is WAS, and it's water access structures. So the first thing that you're doing is you're taking a look at the water component. I want to hold the water on my land for as long as possible. The best holding capacity, carrying capacity is dams, and then the soil. So organic matter in the soil will hold 10 times its weight in water. So its ability to hold on to that water for an extended period of time is quite drastic. So that's where we talk about the scary part about conventional agriculture with the plow specifically, because of the amount of soil that gets lost to the wind and everything. Lierre Keith wrote a book and talks about the soil component that was, sort of 100 years ago. How much soil did we have across the Great Plains of North America? 10 to 30 feet of topsoil, roughly. So that's the prairie grasses specifically have extremely long tap roots that create that soil as animals graze over top of them. They cause a process where the roots die off and then regrow. And those roots that do die off cause or form organic matter in the soil. Deeper and deeper it goes over time. Well, today, there's a lot of places that have like 1 to 2 inches of
That's
topsoil. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that's the standard amount that's there, but it's a large component of
Wow.
the
And where does
loss.
soil go?
Most of it gets washed right into the ocean. The amount of soil that's in our waterways through agriculture now is phenomenal.
And that's because of how we do agriculture. And before it would have been naturally replenishing itself, but now it's just being...
a forest will produce roughly 2.5 centimeters of topsoil every 100 years. So it's a slow process.
Yeah.
A prairie grassland can do that quite a bit faster, especially if it has the animal
herding
aspect of
bisons
it.
or buffalo or something.
Yeah, for sure. So the natural process of what we do. Sorry, actually, I'll say this instead. The process in which we move animals on land now has changed quite a bit. So there's a guy named Alan Savory, South African, and in the 70s, I think, he was part of an ecological restoration project in South Africa. And they ended up killing 30,000 elephants to what they thought was the benefit of the environment. Whoa. And what they learned from it is that it is the exact opposite. The animals grazing across the landscape are actually what encourage the regrowth. So the cycling of nutrients and minerals through the landscape via animals is the way that nature has provided for itself.
Why did they think killing the animals would
Well, they
work?
thought that
What's
the
your theory?
elephants, with how large they were compacting the ground, that water's no longer able to penetrate. So when we are getting these, the environment is changing around us, and we get, larger rain events now over shorter periods of time. So instead of getting 2 inches of rain over, 2 days, we get that in an hour in some places. And so the carrying capacity of the soil goes down because of the saturation rate. So it can only take up so much at one time, right? Mm-hmm. So through this process, they figured out that moving animals, we can mimic that on small scale. So we can take, say we have a 40-acre farm and we got 40 acres of grassland. We can keep our animals in a very small enclosed space. And now this isn't like a factory farm where these animals don't get to move around and they're locked in cages. This is herds of animals moving across landscape. So we control how fast they move and when they get to come back to the same space. And so that process, coupled with a few other processes, we can really begin that soil rebuilding cycle quite quickly.
Cool.
Over larger landscapes for sure. So we concentrate those animals over on an acre of land. You can have X amount of animals based on how good the landscape currently is.
Right.
And so that improves over time. You can fit more animals onto the space over time, and you cycle them quite regularly. So they typically stay off of the same area for more than 90 days. Maybe they only get there once every year, once every 2 years, depending on what kind of scale your operation is. But you can really set to improve your farm, your nutrient availability, and the health of your animals, essentially negating the need for veterinarians. All of the antibiotics, the animals get substantially healthier, and they become quite a bit more docile. And that's really where it gets interesting, is because they know they're getting moved to greener pasture every day, every 3 days, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So they actually they become quite attached to you as providership. So they become quite a bit more docile, and that stress response when you do harvest these animals goes down quite a bit. So the quality of meat goes up, not only in its nutrient quality, but it doesn't have the stress response of being in a terrible environment or whatever it is.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. If you were going to factor in things like the current population of the Earth and continents, combined with the land we have for farming and the process it takes to convert the traditional, or just say chemical agriculture, to permaculture and that whole stuff, all these factors, we've got to feed people on a mass scale. And you've already said that yield production can actually be greater and all that kind of stuff. How long do you think it could take, just your kind of guess, your knowledgeable guess of to change our current system to feed what we need to feed and have it done in the proper permaculture kind of system?
Yeah, it's so tough to say because it really relates to a number of people.
But let's say you had and all everyone's approval, the government and the corporations, you had all the resources to do that.
Overnight?
Yeah,
I mean, realistically, like if everybody was on board with it, it's overnight. I mean, you could get rid of all the other stuff. It really comes back to manpower. You know, we used mechanized machinery for agriculture to the large extent. So, I mean, to put it more into terms that we can sort of look at as like a rational aspect to it, you know, replenishing fertility within a landscape is about a 1.5-year process on the most productive scale that exists. I'd love to get into all the details, but you guys will have me talking here for about a week. So
I'll have part 2 then.
Yeah, for sure. So the you know, that process to reinstill fertility into a landscape is about a 1.5 years at its fastest possible that we have right now. So, you know, when you have that, then you can have the animal integration. So it's roughly a 1.5 to 3 year turnaround, depending on how dedicated the landowner is to converting it over. But
I can see why that'd be pretty daunting for anybody who was even thinking about switching over.
Certainly, right. And so this is where you know, my sort of interest goes now, is that to go into landscape, to go into a piece of property and say, okay, well, I'm going to set this up. I'm going to go through the initial process. I'm going to get things functional for you so that you don't have to. All you have to do is manage once it's set up. And so this is, you know, this is where I feel I make my contribution, is that we can start to move forward with how do we get more and more people not only willing to do this, but capable to do this too. Because there is, you know, it's not a necessarily easy thing. It's not overly complicated, but it isn't, you know, 1, 2, 3, and you're there. You know, there is a compilation of things that need to be put together to make sure that you don't do things wrong. So, I mean, there's a scope of different environments that exist across this planet where we perform agriculture, and it's different on every one. So in a drier landscape where, you know, let's take Arizona for example, they irrigate everything that's grown there. You know, there's a huge push away from annual crops, things like lettuces and tomatoes and carrots and whatnot, and more to the perennial versions of plants because of the application of water management. So trees, specifically in arid climates where we have, you know, a limited amount of rainfall, really get a lot of moisture through condensation. You know, up to 80% of the moisture that a tree will receive over its life, it comes in the form of condensation in an arid climate. And so that's something that's not really taken into account, and it kind of gets sort of kicked aside when we look at agriculture production. But there's a huge amount of, you know, plants that we use as agricultural production. I mean, that are perennials. You know, anything that comes off a tree is a perennial.
Okay.
Tomatoes are actually a perennial crop, so that you can grow them, you know, year after year.
Yeah.
Kale can be perennialized. So there's lots of different plants that can be put into production in that form.
Okay. So let's say you had like an average size farm, and you want to come in and switch it over to permaculture. What kind of investment would it be for that farmer to do something like that? Because I guess you would be the consultant, and they'd be having to put up all the capital to do that. So
yeah.
How much of an investment would that be for a farmer?
Well, it depends on
the size of the farm and lots of different things.
Size of farm. You know, I think with a relatively small investment, when you look at the grand scheme of things, you know, $50,000 to $60,000, depending on, you know, some of the specifics, equipment that you're going to need. You know, most of the stuff you can rent to, you know, for single use kind of things to really get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
It comes back to like labor force. So if you have to pay somebody.
So now you're increasing your labor on your land.
Yeah, essentially. So that's the initial process of like reinstalling is intensive. So, you know, I understand, like I get it. I know why people aren't thrilled about this. They have to completely change their way of life when it comes to producing. But
and create some jobs.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, probably where jobs need to be created too.
Exactly.
You know,
well, that's what happened during agriculture. Was a lot of the jobs in the farms, basically were lost. So they all migrated to cities to find work, right? And now we can bring some of those people out of the cities, which would be amazing, especially in Vancouver because we're so congested.
Yeah.
It'd be awesome to get some people moving into the farmlands and
Yeah.
producing some
For
high quality organic foods.
For sure, and I think there's a push for it. I mean, there's a lot of people that the 20s to 30s bracket that are really interested
Definitely.
in getting back involved with that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's just access to land. I can't go buy land. Like, do you guys got $800,000 I can borrow for some?
So what would be the
I don't
incentive
have
then? No, not right now, but we can track it down. But what would be the incentive, do you think, for somebody to switch their whole farm over to a permaculture farm? Would it be just the idea that they can now grow really high quality organic foods and that there might be a market for that, so they can actually turn a profit selling that kind of product?
Yeah, there's definitely the component. I think it's much more economically feasible to be growing crops that have a future. Really, we're in that sort of situation now where we see some of the larger scale environmental shifts that are coming forward to really inhibit large scale production over time. So there's that component of benefiting the environment, the security of it. If you have all the water you need on your property and you get only one rainfall event, but you say you get a foot of rainfall in a period of 2 weeks, but you store it all,
Right.
you don't have that concern of I don't have any more irrigation water because the neighbors pumped all the groundwater out for the last 20 years and
Yeah.
we don't have any more. So there's that component. There's the security component. There's the economic component.
Do you think, so you say there's a distinction between organic foods and like permaculture foods.
Yeah.
I think eventually it'll be like you can buy
what I was
permaculture
gonna ask.
foods and it'll be like there'll be like a specialty section for permaculture food. And this is like the highest quality of food you can
Yeah,
get.
there's a couple of labeling bodies that are trying to sort of exist right now. They're going through their own issues because supermarkets are unaware of what permaculture even is. I mean, the average person,
It's true.
I have to
Explain what it even is.
I have to really put an education component to any of the consultation work that I do because people I guess it's new here. Some of the rest of the world actually is pretty open to permaculture as an ideology, and sort of this is where I've had to make some changes in how I market myself. Is I'm not a permacultural designer practitioner in North America. I am a regenerative land management consultant.
Right.
And that's because of the stigma that is associated with permaculture right now in North America. I don't want to, not that I have anything against people who live a hippie lifestyle or anything like that, but that is the sort of stigma that goes along with permaculture.
So you've relabeled yourself.
Yeah,
rebranded.
I had to
I gotcha.
rebrand to
Yeah.
sort of evolve or die essentially, right?
What
Right.
countries are really into it right now?
Yeah,
What
who's
are the big
leading?
ones?
Australia is definitely the leader in permaculture. They teach it to their elementary students. Europe on large is very, very open to it. They've been doing agricultural practices there probably longer than anywhere else on scale. So, they see the effects of long-term agriculture production and what it does to the landscape. And so they've got that push even from the older generations. They see the component of that, and that's really the big part of it. Africa's getting on board. I think Africa's kind of the Wild West right now. Still,
Yeah.
they're not
With
really.
everything.
Yeah. So it's it's moving. There's a lot of aid work that's going on in Africa right now that is permaculture based. So there is certainly that component that goes along with it. So
Yeah.
Are there any hotbeds in North America?
Oregon is probably the leader right now,
course.
I would say.
Yeah.
I think you can actually buy like certified
goddamn
permaculture
hippies.
food in Oregon. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
That's cool. That's cool that you're probably going to start seeing this. Like instead of seeing the organic kind of section or certification,
Permaculture section.
yeah,
Yeah.
permaculture certification, or maybe it'll be rebranded or something like that.
I think it'll be rebranded to nutrient density, and the nutrient density of the food will be labeled.
Right.
So it's relatively
wow.
easy to test for nutrient density. There's a tool called a refractometer. Essentially what you're doing is you're pulling the plasma out of the plant. So I take a garlic press, I put like a leaf of lettuce in it. I press the plasma out of the plant, put it onto the refractometer, and it gives me a reading. It kind of works like a kaleidoscope. So light will come through, I look through it, and it gives me a reading on a chart in there.
Cool.
And so it's relatively quick. It's very cost effective.
Right. So
you
people
So
want
they'll be selling food based on nutrient density. Then.
I think that's sort of the future of it.
Wow.
As we become more and more aware of how important not all calories are created equally
Definitely, yeah.
component of food is, that we sort of move to that direction, because awareness really just compounds itself.
Right.
And we are.
Do you think those foods will be a lot more expensive? Like if you're comparing organic to inorganic, if you go one step further and take it to permaculture, it's very, it's even more refined process, I guess you could say.
So we'll use the United States as an example for this. I mean, they subsidize agriculture largely. That's why the current agriculture practices exist. The current farmer, I think, makes an average of $1,600 an acre. And that's pretty poor. In intense permaculture systems. There's people who are making $150,000 on an acre.
Wow.
So
is that from selling their produce?
Yeah, that's from selling their
cow.
their products. So
Wow.
it certainly doesn't need to be more expensive. It's where do the subsidies start to get shifted to, and how do we produce working examples of these systems to produce this stuff, right? So that's really the big component of it, is how do we feed people on scale if we don't have a large population of people who are willing to get back into agricultural production. So we're kind of sort of an in-between space where we have, there is a lot of people who do want to get back into it, but probably not 50% of the population wants to get back into it.
And not to mention, agriculture and farming is really hard work. That's like a lot of work, and like you're gonna, you need a younger population to even sustain that. I mean, you're 50 plus. I don't think you really want to be doing that for a living.
For sure. The great thing with permaculture is it's for the lazy man. After it's established, after the initial process has been put forward and the transformation of the space has gone through, is drastically less work.
Wow.
Like labor?
Labor. I mean,
what about human labor, like just in terms of harvesting and that?
It's reduced. I won't say harvesting. No, isn't reduced.
Okay.
But the actual application of maintenance, continued work. Planting, seeding.
So can you essentially create a piece of land that will sustain itself completely, like year after year after year? If you guys set up correctly, will it sustain itself?
It won't sustain itself. It'll actually regenerate. It'll improve on itself every year.
Okay, regenerate on itself.
Yeah,
so the land is
better
improving
over time.
But so if you set it up correct, it will just kind of happen as a natural process.
Yeah. So that's we as permaculture designers mimic what nature does so well and implement it into a design process. How do we make sure that it compounds on itself over time? How does it regenerate itself? How does it keep nutrients cycling through its system? How does it collect more nutrients? How does it bring more animals into the system? So natural animals coming in, birds drop. So we've all heard of peak oil.
Yeah.
Peak phosphorus is something that happened a long time ago. So as far as an agricultural production application, phosphorus is in very limited supply around the world, where we can get it naturally from birds. So attracting more animals onto your property actually becomes beneficial. It reduces your costs over time. There's a huge plethora of fertility that is just in boom, and the quality. Again, it comes back to the quality of what you're producing, and the amount of time and interest that you have to actually put into the space. It just gets reduced. And there's working examples around the world now that can show this. They're starting to sort of open their doors now to say we've been doing this for 30 years. There's a guy in Hawaii on Molokai, and he's had a food forest, which is essentially just a forest of fruit and nut trees, and he's got mango trees that are 70 feet tall.
Wow, that's big.
Yeah, and I mean, you run into a lot of problems with people saying, "Oh, mango trees are invasive in Hawaii; they're not supposed to be here."
Yeah,
but we've been terraforming this planet for agriculture production for a long time. So a little over 10,000 years now. So it's not going anywhere, and we need to maybe be a little bit more accepting of the environment around us changing as a result of us. And that's not to say we don't protect certain areas. Certainly they hold a lot of benefit, but we need to be a little bit more. Jeff Lawton, who's my teacher from the Permaculture Research Institute, he calls them hardworking immigrants. you bring in a plant from another space on this earth, putting it somewhere else where it can flourish. All it does is work really hard to build soil, produce food.
Right, because it's genetically programmed to be in this harsher climate. Now it's in this abundant, nourishing climate. It's just conditioned to just produce like a madman.
Yeah, exactly.
A mad woman.
A mad plant.
Mad plant.
Mad plant. Yeah, I like that.
That's cool, man. That's really cool. I wanted to actually ask you just a little bit about like GMOs and stuff like that. And I mean, because Neil deGrasse Tyson, he was on YouTube or something. He was filmed recently. I don't know, have you seen that? Where he kind of goes off about GMOs. Like, we've always been genetically modifying organisms by selecting this and selecting that. Technically, yes, you're correct, Neil. But is he kind of missing something there?
Ooh, Mike just called out Neil.
Yeah.
Come on.
I'm going to throw him a high five for that.
He's a wrestler too.
So.
He can probably squash me, but it doesn't matter. But you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I've seen what he talks about. Yeah, I mean, it's a short-sighted viewpoint for sure. He's taking a process in which nature does most of the work,
right?
And comparing it to a process in which we take genes from bacteria or another plant or a chemical and pump it into a plant so that it is going to grow a chemical out of it, essentially.
Yeah.
There's the BT corn, for example, has a strain of pesticide put into its genetics so that it actually produces pesticide. Well, it's pretty different than if you take two pieces of corn and hybridize them and they produce a better quality of corn, right?
I agree.
So, I mean, look.
It's disappointing when someone in that high profile does that.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't even say that I dislike GMOs that much. What I dislike about GMOs is the unregulated testing that goes on with them. We're at a point where there's cross-contamination around the world from GMOs that have, a limited, very, very short testing time of, regarding human health. The longest one that exists, which has been performed by, any one of the chemical companies, you name it, is only 90 days. That is
on a human subject. Sounding?
That is the
That's
length.
Crazy.
That is the length of any study that is the longest length of any study that is regarding human health to genetically modified foods. So
I mean, if it was proven safe, I wouldn't have any issue with it whatsoever. I think if you can utilize science to create a more abundant food supply for the world, then great, but as long as it's safe.
Yeah, and I mean, the testing process in which we do it needs to be controlled environments as well. And that's where the real complication comes in too with testing these things is, okay, we can go, to a secluded island and grow all of these products, but then we're going to completely destroy that environment. But the wind carries, the majority of pollen, seeds, birds come in and, drop this stuff, cross-contaminate all over the world. So, under what circumstances can you say you have a controlled environment, right? And that's really where the big issue comes into play for me is we can't go grow food on the moon where it can't cross-contaminate us here, right? So,
well, one thing that you could see, like how many countries now, I don't know this number at all, but how many countries have actually banned GMOs?
I don't know that number either, but I mean,
that's happening.
Yeah,
now, right?
I mean, all over the world. I mean, maybe there's some economic
incentive there.
To certain places, but I mean, there's lawsuits. American Farmers Association has a lawsuit against Syngenta right now for over $1 billion on the fact that they can't now sell their corn that they produce to China because China put a restriction on it because it was untested over there. So there's these companies are shooting themselves in the foot essentially.
Right.
They really, I don't know who their business management planner is, but they might want to reconsider for sure.
They're not thinking that far ahead. Probably they're thinking year-over-year profits,
yield.
Yeah, I guess the component that's overlooked for the most part is that these companies aren't trying to sell you seeds. 80%, 85% of the profits they make is from selling chemicals. They want to patent this seed so that you get locked into a contract that you can't reuse any other seed, and that you have to spray their chemicals to make sure that this is what
that plant survives.
Yeah, exactly. So no, we don't want any weeds or whatever. So it's an awful process that exists right now, but it's not going to last for too much longer. And just the general awareness from the people that exist on this planet. I mean, North America in itself, we'll just go Canada and the U.S., Mexico, not as much. We're the furthest behind, really.
Really?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, everywhere else in this world has had the conversation of banning it. I mean, I guess you can include Australia with us. They're pretty rough.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Why are we lagging so far?
Well, the political structure of our system is allowing the corporate lobbyists to, really hold a lot of weight over, what decisions get made, who's getting subsidized. There's a lot of weight behind these agrochemical companies to subsidize chemical farming. And when you have that much money and that much pressure and that much funding for that politician's campaign, and they're going to side with you, you have that compounding effect again where, okay, well, we'll do it for this person.
Yeah.
And, we won't subsidize organic agriculture because our buddy's got our back over here for, $30 million in the next election or whatever, right? I mean, we saw it with the failure of the Oregon GMO labeling campaign. $38 million was pumped into the anti-labeling campaign.
Wow.
$38 million from, food companies, McDonald's, Pepsi, all these wonderful corporations that exist that produce, these high quality, nutritious products for us all.
Well, I mean, they're just in it to survive, right? I mean, they're just under their own interest, and that's part of the kind of overlaying problem is just, and it's not that there's evil people out to do evil stuff necessarily. It's a system that's developed naturally.
Yeah.
And people maybe don't want to hear that. People that are kind of rebelling against it don't want to hear that, oh, it's a natural process. Well, it kind of is. And you know what? It's only now that now that we have greater understanding of the whole system itself on a human individual level of nutrition and health to the effects of the environment, all these different things. And combine that with the need that a government needs to supply food for its people. You know what I mean? So back in the days, we'll support farming, and so and then it just evolves from there. And
so you're not saying it's a global conspiracy or a national conspiracy?
I mean, depends on what your definition of a conspiracy is, I guess. But it's.
I agree with you. It's a natural process overall.
But
it has evolved in a way that's unhealthy.
Totally, and it just gets upsetting when people are now, like you said, investing $38 million into preventing something that is actually better from happening, and that's where things are getting kind of gross.
Yeah,
and scary.
Well, it's really where they're shooting themselves in the foot too, because this gets a lot of public publicity now.
Yeah.
Maybe the monetary portion doesn't get put about how much money these people are spending, but why don't you want to label our food? The next election come around, it's going to go through. I mean, Oregon failed by, I think it was less than 1%.
Yeah.
And, a lot of that's probably lack of voter turnout or, the right people voting for the right things. But there's so much misinformation out there. And, that really comes back to the corporate accountability. There's so little that goes on as far as penalizing these companies that put misleading studies out there to sway public opinion about something, and then after the election we lied or we were wrong or whatever, make a public apology, but there's no financial.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, they're giving money to a university to conduct a study that inherently is probably designed biased, with bias and. But then there's other research coming out of universities that is, completely supporting the other side of it. So, the information is coming from these institutions that are, but it's just who's funneling the money in, and, it's just a big mess. But it's just a system that developed out of the, the circumstances and the behaviors of the people involved, and now that people are getting the awareness and the information that will affect their behaviors. This will affect, the production and the outcome.
Yeah,
it's just a process.
And the ideology behind evolve or die within a business, the growth of a business. I think we see these large corporations, these large companies making the shifts in the right direction. So,
well, I think they have to, right?
And
that's kind of the beauty of capitalism in a way, because, for example, a company that's not evolving and meeting the needs of consumers and what they want will die. eventually. Except the problem comes in when you have governments coming and bailing out these big companies. Because now it's not really capitalism; it's some weird kind of, I don't know, social capitalism. I don't know what it is. It's, the government's now instead of letting that company fail, which it should fail, they go and save it because it's so big, and that's more in the financial sector. But it's kind of an example of how the government is bailing out companies that should be allowed to fail, and like in true capitalism. And, So if the company is not meeting the need or demand of their consumers, it should die.
Absolutely, I completely agree. That's the conversation about Uber, the new cab service that Vancouver and Las Vegas we're not allowed to have it quite yet. It's going to come. The rest of the
What's the deal with that? Why are we not allowed to have it?
I guess because of the cab companies have the politicians on their side about job loss and licensing agreements and insurance, like who is and isn't allowed and properly trained to transport another human being on the road in a vehicle.
I do that all the time. I'll pick you up and I'll drive you to your home.
Exactly. It's just a matter of time, but this is where we come to.
Well, Vancouver's probably one of the slowest municipalities in terms of changing anything. Is what we found, because this is regulated to death. I mean, this whole city is just like every little nook and cranny is. They try to be progressive, but they're really not that progressive.
I agree.
Yeah, it's something that we're starting to see in the United States. Actually, has more freedom than what Canada does as far as certain businesses, certain.
Well, look at legalizing marijuana. How many states have done it now? 6 or something.
Kidding.
It's amazing that the states beat us to that. That's what I thought initially.
It blew me away. Yeah.
We're more regarded as a conservative country, and financially it's a conservative. It is more secure. It's a little
and it's more socialist too.
More stable. So it has its pros and cons of being that kind of system.
Yeah, really. The people. Yeah, I guess the restriction is that the people can't invoke change quite as quickly as some of the other countries that have a little bit more civil liberty, I guess, behind them.
Yeah, and I think you said it best when the quickest change we can invoke is the choices you make with your dollars.
Yeah,
that's our voting power stronger than our.
And on that note, I think Vancouver is actually probably a hub or a hotbed for that, because everybody here is so health conscious and so health aware. I imagine Vancouver is like a hotbed for quality foods.
Probably the furthest along in the world, I would say. I mean, from my experience, it's tough to say, who is the furthest along, but
sure. I mean, Vancouver's got to be up there.
For sure.
Pockets.
We certainly don't produce a lot of it, but we definitely import a lot of it. Yeah. We import a lot of it. So it's something that we'll see change or as time progresses. You're not.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with long-term, let's say cancer rates in the city, for example. If more and more people are switching to organic foods, organic products, more quality, living more healthy, active lifestyles, which we see in the city, very few people smoking, less people drinking alcohol, and how that would combine with cancer rates or diabetes or heart disease or whatever.
Yeah, I'm pretty interested to see when the first few studies start to be released about cannabis versus alcohol use, because I think
has that not been done?
Studies of whole cities that have
not the big scale studies yet.
Yeah.
I think the initial maybe observational studies coming forward, or whether they're formal or not, are kind of hinting. I think where you're going with that is it's going to be drastic. I think an alcohol fueled society, and don't get me wrong, I'll drink alcohol from time to time, but I must admit my consumption habits have drastically changed. I think it's kind of massive health improvement qualities, as those corporations.
Health improvement qualities, but just when someone's drunk, they become pretty obnoxious a lot of times. Even if you don't think you're being obnoxious, and if you're a happy drunk, you're louder, you're more boisterous, you're probably more disturbing in general. If someone's smoking a little J in the corner, they're not necessarily going to be that way.
They're pondering the physics of the table. They're like, oh man,
how is this even here?
It's solid, but it's fucking vibrating, and most of it is space. But cool.
Yeah.
Well, man, this was fascinating. This is really cool, and I think we really just that was a good introductory to permaculture and some of even what it what it affects and what it means. So.
Anything else you want to get out there?
Yeah.
It's not
anything you want to kind of address?
Well, we need another podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we need a whole series by this.
We can do that.
That's a great idea.
We love content like this. This is great.
Yeah. I guess the biggest thing I can say is you vote with your dollars, but don't be afraid to grow a garden in your backyard.
If you have a backyard.
Yeah, if you have a backyard, if you have a balcony, get a couple of planters. Whatever it is, there's a certain component to which is a freeing feeling, knowing that you can at least grow, a little bit, a bit of kale in your.
Are there any
porch.
good resources for someone that maybe was looking to do something like that?
Yeah, okay, that's probably the best thing that can be brought up. Permaculturenews.org is one of the best ways to sort of get in touch with the permaculture community at large. Permies.com is a forum-based website. I have my own reservations about the guy who runs it. He's obviously doing some great work, but he's a bit kooky. So
he's a permie.
Yeah, he's got the biggest and the loudest voice right now.
He controls the site, right?
Yeah. So
cool.
And the designer's manual, permaculture designer manual. Don't try and read it all in one go, but it's got so much information about how we can move forward as not only a culture that's based on agriculture, but as a society, really how to structure ourselves into a settlement of permanence. So we get to be here, our children get to be here, our grandchildren, and so on and so forth. So
I was going to ask you one more thing. Let's say you're at your retirement, you're retiring from your career with permacultural design and sustainable environments and stuff, where do you think it's going to be at? Where do you think it could be within your career span?
Maybe growing food in space. I don't know.
Okay, there you go. So really limitless then, eh?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, there's.
You're gonna go partner with Elon Musk.
Yeah, for sure. That would be pretty interesting to sort of start terraforming Mars next. We got some work to do here first, though.
Cool. Yeah, for sure. We'll get Earth balanced first, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, everyone needs to get
Cool. Well, thanks, Ryan, for coming on. That was super cool, very fascinating, and I'd like to get more into it and as you progress as well. Permanentconsulting.com will be your website, and Permanent Consulting on Facebook. It's Ryan Hill. Permacultural designer. And dude, thanks for coming on Vancouver Real.
Mike, Andy, thanks so much for having me here, guys. It's great.
It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Yeah, come back.
Absolutely.
Until next time, to whatever is.
Whatever is.